there.
Hello.
So, welcome to the channel. And for the people who are watching the channel, all seven of my subscribers, this is my brother, Brian McCollum. Brian is the youngest brother, and he's going to talk to us today about his experiences as a substitute teacher. And so I should tell you beforehand that I have also done the gig of substitute, but not nearly as much as Brian. I've only done it in one kind of extended stint. So, Brian, tell us something that subs should know. What should subs know?
Subs should know that no matter what the plan is for the day, you are going to have to make adjustments.
Mm.
There is no plan that is so all inclusive that it will take into account all the vagaries that happen during a school day.
Yeah.
And to be an effective sub, one has to acknowledge that there are things that you are going to be faced with that you did not plan for and be willing to accept that situation.
So, a kind of peaceful spirit.
Yeah, as much as possible. I mean, it's it's not something that um, a peaceful spirit is a great thing, but expecting people to act only in peaceful ways, no matter what happens during a day, I don't think is realistic. There's going to be frustration, there's going to be stuff, but as a sub, it's very essential not to let that frustration bubble up in a way that's apparent to the students, because um, uh, you've addressed classroom management, so you know one of the things for classroom management is not letting the power dynamic shift uh, to the fact that the class then becomes the dictate of what will happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not one. I believe in student participation and letting kids express themselves in appropriate ways within the classroom, but there has to be a format that allows for uh, coherent movement. Um, Chaos and randomness do not serve anybody's interest.
I remember once you came to visit at Goddard and you were watching the band. They were practicing their show and you were looking at the flags and going, oh, Brownie in motion.
Well, there wasn't a lot of cohesiveness, a lot of chaos, right? And you could see on those flag girls' faces that they were not happy with how things were going. And when you're in the stands and you can see that on people's faces, that's not a good sign.
No, no. It's always out there waiting to try to enter. That chaotic feeling is always trying to make an entrance. Um, so is there a school vibe or a classroom vibe that is reassuring to subs? Is there something that a classroom can do that will reassure a sub?
Typically, a sub will be able to tell within 5 minutes of a class beginning, whether it's an elementary, junior high, or high school, whether or not the teacher themselves has good grasp of classroom management, or whether or not there are problematic students that are going to do their best to disrupt the flow of class. So yes, there are signs, but typically they are ones that if you have an experienced sub, they recognize the signs. If you have an inexperienced sub, typically their expectation is they're going to have an idealized memory in their mind about what school was like for them. And they're going to walk into situations that are not going to match that expectation. And that's when things can become really problematic, especially if you have a sub who is also very hesitant or unsure of how they're supposed to deal with situations. Um, and part of the problem with the sub population, the people who do subs, is because there are so few qualified people to do the job that you have a lot of people in those situations that don't have a background in education at all. So they're flying blind.
Right. So did you get any kind of training in the district where you're working?
The district in which I'm working is what I feel is typical for many districts across the country. There are too few people to do the job. So they are taking people that don't have background. They have a blanket 2 or 3 hour session that they will do at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of certification. They've also rolled out multiple online courses that are dictated by human resources, covering things from proper handling of biohazardous material, fluid spills, the kind of corporate
Right.
trainings that
Right.
would be found in any place that has hazmat materials, which is every place. You know, don't do this, don't do that, be respectful of people. You know, they're trying to provide training, but once again, the variability of what happens in a school place is so large that I would say it's impossible to cover every situation that's going to come up.
Right.
But they're trying to address it.
Yeah. So, um, I was aware of that because I did sub at Gadsden. And I know that subs do not make as much as teachers. They are paid on a day-to-day basis, right? That's how it's done, right?
It is not a contract position in the sense that you receive a flat rate across the school year. Your pay is dependent on how many. There's a couple of variables. Number one, you get paid a different rate if you're a teacher or if you're an educational assistant, an EA.
Oh,
Those
okay.
those will necessitate different pay rates. You will get paid if you are serving part of a day or a full day. Those will be different pay rates. Um, and you will also be paid differently depending on the level of education that you have received. The more credit hours that you have at a college, or if you have a degree, will give you higher pay rates the more you have completed. But there is an upper limit cutoff. In other words, if you have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, you are still going to get paid the same rate as a sub for a full day's work.
Right. Right. That's pretty true of teachers too. That our pay was always dependent on our educational level. That was part of it. We got experience pay, but I don't think subs get that. Do you? Do you get a step if you have experience?
No, there is no step for experience, and which is one of the challenges for finding really competent people to do the job.
Yeah.
Um, I can't think of many employment situations where people say, well, I'm going to go ahead and expand my knowledge base because I'm not going to get paid more. That just what? Why? Why would you do that? You're expending money to not make any more money. Most people would look at that and say that's a no-brainer. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Um, and the thing is, with substitute teachers, a lot of times the people that don't have experience, don't have a lot of background with educational practices and what happens in schools, they wash out fairly quickly. There's a lot of turnover in sub positions. Finding competent subs therefore becomes for competent teachers sorry find finding a competent sub is something that they really value and try and cultivate.
Right. Well, we had when I was at Goddard. Now, get this. At the last school I was in, they didn't for that time that I was there, they didn't hire subs. They made working teachers in the building sub for missing teachers during their prep times. So that was awful.
Because you have understaffing of subs, that still happens in public schools as well as
Oh,
so
oh,
that's part of the problem. You have, and bluntly, the way that society in general has now moved to demonizing teachers
yeah,
and accusing them of being this, that, or the other slackers or scare quotes DEI agents or whatever, um,
yeah,
then what happens is you have a dearth of people who are willing to participate in the process. You have large amounts of people who are taking their kids out of school and saying, I'm going to homeschool. And for me, that's extremely problematic because many of the people who are pulling out to homeschool also have zero experience in how to conduct effective learning practices. They think it's simple and magical. They will impart all of the things that they need to give to students primarily by osmosis, I can only imagine. We have the right people, so the right things will be learned. Well, can your kid recite the times tables? If not, they didn't learn anything,
right.
right or
Well,
wrong.
see, and that's the thing, Brian. I think homeschool misses something essential, um, and that has to do with that community existence. You,
Socialization.
yes, and you can't really replace that with a big family. That's just not the same. And the other thing I think about the work of subs, I think sometimes teachers forget that subs have only so much experience with their students. So anything that can provide the teacher that allow or the sub that allows them to understand the dynamic of the room coming in will help. Not you said you didn't necessarily need detailed lesson plans, but you like them. But not all teachers, not all subs can do them.
Well, so I will have experienced teachers who will give me specific guidelines about this student has food allergies. This student is in elementary school. This one likes to run, as in escape the classroom. Um, do not let these students sit together. This student is not allowed to be on the computer during this time. Watch for this student being on YouTube or inappropriate sites for school time activity. You know, um, those help.
Right.
Not all teachers, and the thing is, you have a bunch of teachers who have had the experience of ineffective subs being in the classroom, where they say, in essence, "Have a good day. Here's some handouts. Hope you make it." You know, and you know,
Nice going.
eh, glad you're here. They're glad you're there.
Oh my gosh, yes,
They're
I was very aware that subs had less experience, right, than necessarily I had. And so I always, if I had a sub and I could prepare for it, I always had a test for the kids. They took tests and they were always threatened with death if they gave the sub any business.
You know this already. There may be some teachers out there that don't know this. You can say you are going to have consequences for your behavior. The kids that are going to listen to that will listen to it. There are kids who do not care.
Yeah,
That is not a motivating factor for them.
right.
I was substituting in a junior high, and I was in a classroom, and there was a young man who was in that classroom who was possibly one of the worst behavioral things I had to deal with in my entire sub experiences. It, and I am not the kind of person who typically will reach out to the classroom next door because I feel like they've got their job to do. I'm
Right.
trying to do my job here. But it got so bad that I was like, I went to the next classroom and said, "Can I have your assistance in here for a second?" And that student went out into the hallway with the teacher that I had talked to, and they're inquiring what's going on. And I overheard him saying, "I just hate subs. I hate subs. I can't deal with them." What are you supposed to, if you're the teacher who's left a sub plan and says this person is going to be a problem? Yeah, they're going to be a problem. You know why? They hate subs.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to change that in a day.
No, 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 no.
That's something that has been reinforced in their life, probably from several different angles.
Yeah,
From home, it's easy. It's a societal trope that subs are ineffective, tyrannical, um, not all that bright. Uh, all of these things are said about subs, and it's accepted. So the sub is operating at a disadvantage to begin with because the kids come in saying there are typically two reactions to kids about subs. Number one, free day. The sub is not going to know what's going on.
right,
They're not going to be effective. They
right.
don't know me. They're not going to be able to, they won't do anything to me because they don't know anything. I'm in charge today. That's one of the main reactions to a sub walking into a classroom.
Yeah.
Free day. The second typical reaction to a sub is complete disconnect. It's not a free day per se. It's, I'm not doing anything today. I'm just not going to do anything.
Yeah,
Um, and that's different from free day. Free day is I'm going to do what I want.
right.
Disconnect is I'm not going to do anything. Those are two different things.
Yeah. Well, did I tell you that story about the sub? For one test, I left with the AP kids. It was on poetic meter. So they were supposed to scan the lines, these different lines of poems, and tell what meter it was and what line length it was. And so I had taught them, every time your chin drops is a syllable, or you hear it like a rhythm like that. Well, on the test, I had the line, "Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships?" Very famous line, Christopher Marlowe, iambic pentameter, easy line. In my opinion, it was an easy line to scan. But the sub wrote this note. She said, "Something has gone very wrong. Your students, your students are very upset about the word launched." Okay. So they were going, launched, 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 launched. They could. It was 7 letters. It was 7 letters in one syllable, and they could not get around it. So the whole room was just out of their mind.
I don't understand.
Of course, who knows that? No sub is going to be up on poetic meter as they walk into the room. That's you just don't have the right to expect that, right?
Well, here's the thing. The expectation of what a sub might or might not know is often so unconscious that it's hard for teachers to make adjustment. And sometimes it's justified. I mean, okay, I'm not meaning to be mean, but I go into an elementary school classroom. They switched me from the original assignment that they had because they had another sub didn't show up. So I get thrown in to a class 5 minutes before it's supposed to begin. The first class of the day is multiplying mixed fractions.
Oh, oh,
Because of my experience, especially knowing you as a teacher, who helped me out with math and fractions and stuff when I was growing up,
right.
I was able to say, okay, here's what you do. So you find, okay, let's just make this up, right? Uh, 1/8 times 3/5. You have to find the common denominator. Easiest way to find the common denominator, multiply the denominators by each other. What you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. There's a lot of people out there, adults who function in society, who don't know how to do that.
No, no,
And
that's right.
they are not going to be able to effectively say it to somebody. Even worse, okay, is there a common denominator that's smaller that you don't have to multiply each number by each other? You just find the smallest number that's in common between them.
Right.
A lot of people who can't do that either. So if another sub had been thrown into that situation, they may have felt completely at sea at that point and had punted and gone, read a book, do anything, because I don't know how to do this. And if I teach you wrong, then the teacher is going to have to come back and reteach it because I've taught you something incorrect. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. So I no, I wouldn't want to do it because I'll tell you something. That's something that kids, you're right. A kid can have learned that, and as an adult, it's so long in the past, they can't pull it back. And that's one of the things that I've talked about on my episode is that on my channel is that kids would say, "We never learned this." And since I taught freshmen and seniors, I knew better. I taught kids, they're both their freshman and senior year. And if I taught them their freshman year, I knew what they had been taught because I was there. And they would say, "We never learned this." And I'm like, I have proof. Not only that you learned this, but you took a test and passed it.
Yeah, I taught you this. I know I
Yeah.
taught you this.
Yeah, and I have evidence of that. But that's the thing. I think that people sometimes forget that if you don't use that coin all the time, if it doesn't come up, you may or may not be able to recall it. Like something as maybe not esoteric. What's the word I'm looking for? Something so rarefied as talking about the different types of phrases, like the infinitive phrase, and the participle, and the gerund. Those things, right? Those are words that nobody talks about past school. That's that's high level grammar.
Yeah, unless you're in a setting where you're talking about that specific subject at that level, you're not using it in day-to-day language. You just aren't.
Oh. So yeah, so one thing, so what I'm getting from this is that one thing teachers definitely can do to help subs is write a letter that says, in each class, these are the things you need to know about. These are the kids you need to know about in each class. Does having a seating chart help?
Yes. It helps with attendance, number one. It also helps if you've got students who are like, they walk in and they're like free day, and they're like, I'm going to switch to sit back next to my buddy.
Right.
Then you can help establish classroom management principles by saying, no, I have a seating chart here. This is where you're supposed to seat.
Mhm.
Um, or no, you're not sitting there because I know that this is you wanting to sit with your friend and not do much today other than visit.
Right. Right. Um, so what about administrators? Do you deal with administrators much as a sub? Do you ever see them or talk to them?
Depends on the administrator of the school, just like anything else with administrators. It's completely up to the administrator. Um, some schools I've subbed at for years and never talked to a principal. Some schools I met the principal within 5 minutes of entering the school.
Wow.
You asked earlier about if you can feel stuff. You can a lot of times feel, and I can't explain it in a purely rational fashion, but a lot of times you can walk into a school and just the way that people are interacting, the way that the school is set up, you can tell if you have a school that encourages kind of an open and caring atmosphere, or those that are more, to put it bluntly, authoritarian and boom, 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 this way, no other way. Or in worst case scenario, those schools where you walk in and go, no one's in charge here.
This is chaos.
This is chaos.
Yeah.
There are far too many things going on that are not good in an educational setting.
Right.
Those are the ones where you go, oh man,
Gonna be a hard day.
this is going to be a day.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so one of the things that we had at Goddard, we had a permanent sub. So in the building, they actually had a guy hired that was there simply to sub. He would go to any room, he could do any subject, um, but he was like the emergency call in, right? Um, he was sort of an interesting guy. But one of the most interesting subs we had an oxygen tank that he carried around with it. And I always thought, wow, the kids must be really, I mean, our kids are that nice that they're nice to someone who has an oxygen tank, who's clearly enfeebled. They're respectful to someone who's enfeebled.
Depends on the students. Okay, so because I am on peritoneal dialysis, I worry about having uh, infections because uh, my immuno response is not as good as someone whose kidneys function.
Right.
So I wear a mask every time I'm in school and all day. I wear a mask. And given the conditions of where I live and what goes on, there are a lot of people, both students and adults, who
Mm-hmm.
look at me and are either questioning or bluntly hostile to someone who wears a mask. There are students who will straight up ask, which I love because that gives me the opportunity to explain to them why I wear a mask and what is happening.
Right.
For those that are hostile, I don't push the subject on them, but neither am I required to not wear my mask for my own personal safety.
Right.
So there are students who are understanding, there are students that are questioning, and there are students who are hostile.
Right.
That also goes for the adults in the school,
Yeah.
also fit all three categories.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. I also think it's interesting the idea of having a permanent sub, but given the staffing levels and um, monetary concerns and everything else in the flux that education is going through right at the moment, you will not have that
Yeah.
in schools, in public schools. It's just not going to happen,
Yeah. So
at
yeah,
least not
it,
right now.
it's kind of an interesting thing because I suspect that having a permanent sub in each building would be a good idea. You wouldn't that wouldn't cover everything, but it would definitely be better to have somebody there if something went down. Because we
Well,
have had situations where we've had teachers go down in the classroom where somebody had to come in.
yeah. Well, and the other thing that would be beneficial in such a situation is that you would have people that would be familiar with the student population in a way that you can't do on a rotating basis for a sub coming in. They don't know the student population that way.
Right,
So,
right,
um, that permanent sub would have the ability to say, I know this, I know this student is um, has these behaviors. I know this student can be trusted. I know
right.
this student is okay intellectually, but may need some extra help focusing on assignments.
Right.
That kind of stuff can be hugely beneficial. But once again, the way that we have the system set up now, you aren't going to have that in public schools.
You did say though that there are a number of teachers that have requested you, right? You do get requested.
I had a class the other day where I had students that I had subbed for the previous year that were in the class that I was subbing that year. And it was much easier to establish rapport.
Right.
Um, whether or not people want to or are cognizant of the fact there is a rapport, either positive or negative, that's established with students as a sub. No matter what, you're gonna interact in that classroom setting. So having it's like having previous relationships outside of the school setting. If you have a previous relationship, you make assumptions and you move forward based on those, and it makes moving forward easier most of the time.
Yeah. Well, look at this, Brian. We've talked for half an hour. Was it painful?
No,
So, have you seen my channel yet?
I've watched a couple of videos. They're very nice. You do an excellent job, but I'm not surprised. That's who you are.
Very nice. Where is that from? There's a cartoon where he says, "Oh, it's very nice." Oh, it's Tarzan, where she says, "Yes, yes, it's very nice," and he goes, "It's very nice." Well, I got to tell you, I really appreciate you doing this. Um, I don't know where I got the idea in the sense that I'm just going to focus on teaching, but I guess it's because that's the only thing I really know about. And it's because John, I had in my mind that John and I would have a podcast. when he retired about teaching. And, that's not going to happen. So having you on is so great. It's so exciting to me. It makes me so happy that you would be willing to do this and talk to me about it. And I think in the end, that's the big thing that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do something that takes my mind off some of the down things that are going on, you know? Yeah.
I understand that urge. I don't know that it is possible to separate the two.
Yeah. And it does come up. I will say it has come up. You say you've seen a few episodes, it has come up. But I'm going to post this on Saturday. So you
Okay.
definitely want to watch.
Okay.
Orson did an episode.
How nice.
It's very nice. And I really appreciate you, Brian. You're
Sure.
my very good brother.
Well, I appreciate you too, sis. And if this was pleasant, then great. Glad to do it.